For most of a century, AB blood type has been treated as an afterthought, a rare leftover category that doctors mention only in passing. Type A gets its own aisle. Type B gets its own story. Type O gets called the universal donor and takes most of the spotlight. AB just sits there, rare and quiet, filed under other. But when researchers actually trace where AB came from, how it forms, and why it barely exists in some parts of the world, while showing up far more often in others, the picture that emerges is stranger than the label rare blood type suggests. AB isn't a leftover. It's evidence of two very different human lineages meeting, mixing, and leaving a genetic fingerprint that most people carrying it have never heard explained. Start with the basics, because the basics are where the surprise actually begins. Blood type comes down to antigens, molecular markers sitting on the surface of red blood cells. Type A carries the A antigen. Type B carries the B antigen. Type O carries neither. Type AB carries both at once. That alone makes AB genetically different from the other three types, in a way that matters more than most people realize. A and B are, in a sense, competing instructions. The gene responsible for blood type comes in three main versions, called alleles: A, B, and O. Each person inherits one version from each parent. If you inherit A from one parent and O from the other, you're type A, because A dominates over O. Same logic applies to B and O. But if you inherit A from one parent and B from the other, something different happens. Neither version dominates the other. Both get expressed at the same time. The result is a blood type that is, quite literally, two blood types occupying one body. Geneticists call this codominance, and AB is the only common blood type built this way. It isn't a diluted version of A or B. It's both, fully expressed at once. That detail already sets AB apart from the story most people learn in school. But the deeper question is, why AB is so rare in the first place? And the answer isn't really biological. It's historical. For AB to exist in a person, that person needs one parent carrying an A allele and another carrying a B allele. That sounds simple enough until you look at how A and B are actually distributed across the planet. They aren't evenly spread. Type A shows up at its highest frequencies across parts of Western Europe. Type B shows up at its highest frequencies across Central and Eastern Asia. For most of human history, these populations lived largely apart from each other, separated by distance, geography, and limited contact. Which means, for thousands of years, the conditions required to produce a child with both A and B alleles simply didn't exist in large numbers. AB wasn't rare because something suppressed it. It was rare because the two populations carrying its ingredients rarely met. That changes the moment you start looking at trade routes instead of blood banks. The regions of the world where AB shows up most often aren't random. They cluster along the corridors where different populations historically crossed paths, intermarried, and exchanged genetics over centuries, not accidentally, but repeatedly, generation after generation. Parts of Central Asia, along the old Silk Road corridors connecting East and West, show elevated AB frequencies compared to regions that stayed more genetically isolated. Japan, Korea, and parts of China also show notably higher AB rates than most of the rest of the world, often in the range of 8 to 11% of the population, compared to a global average closer to 4 or 5%. Meanwhile, in populations that remained more isolated from that kind of mixing, especially indigenous populations across the Americas, AB is almost non-existent. In some of those communities, researchers have found AB blood type essentially absent altogether. Two very different genetic stories sitting in two very different parts of the world, and blood type quietly recording which populations mixed and which didn't. This is where the discovery of AB itself becomes part of the story, because it wasn't even part of the original blood type system. When Carl Landsteiner first identified blood types in 1900 and 1901, he only found three: A, B, and a category he initially called C, which later became O. AB wasn't in that first paper at all. It took two of Landsteiner's colleagues, Alfred von de Castello and Adriano Sturli working a year later in 1902 to identify a fourth category, patients whose blood didn't behave like A, didn't behave like B, and didn't behave like O either. Their red blood cells reacted to both anti-A and anti-B serum at once, something the existing three-type model couldn't explain. AB wasn't theorized in advance and then confirmed. It was found almost by accident, sitting in blood samples that refused to fit the categories scientists had just finished defining. That's part of why AB has always occupied an odd position in blood type history. It wasn't predicted. It was discovered as an exception, and only later did scientists work out the genetics explaining why that exception existed. Once the genetics were understood, another layer of the story opened up. Which allele, A or B, came first? This part remains genuinely debated among researchers, but a common view in population genetics holds that the A and O alleles are older, while the B allele is a comparatively more recent variant that arose later, likely somewhere in Central Asia. If that timeline holds, it means B spent a significant stretch of human history developing and spreading in relative isolation from populations still dominated by A, before trade, conquest, and migration eventually brought the two into repeated contact. AB, in that framing, isn't an ancient blood type at all. It's a genetic signature of contact, a marker that only exists in meaningful numbers once two branches of humanity that developed somewhat apart started meeting on a regular basis. Every person carrying AB blood is, in a very literal sense, carrying proof that somewhere in their ancestry, two lineages that spent long stretches of history apart eventually found each other. There's a practical side to AB that gets far less attention than it deserves, and it flips the usual blood type conversation on its head. Type O gets called the universal donor because its red blood cells carry no antigens for the immune system to react to. AB works almost as the mirror image of that, but for plasma instead of red cells. Plasma is the liquid part of blood, and it carries antibodies. People with type O blood carry antibodies against both A and B antigens, so O plasma can trigger a reaction if given to the wrong recipient. AB blood, though, carries both A and B antigens on its red cells, which means AB plasma carries neither anti-A nor anti-B antibodies, since the body doesn't produce antibodies against itself. That makes AB plasma the universal donor plasma, safe to give to patients of any blood type in trauma and emergency settings. It's a detail that rarely makes it into casual explanations of blood types, but it means AB donors serve a critical, specific role in hospitals and blood banks, one that has nothing to do with red blood cells and everything to do with the liquid carrying them. The flip side of that coin is what makes AB people universal recipients for red blood cells. Because AB red cells already display both A and B antigens, an AB person's immune system doesn't treat either marker as foreign. That means someone with AB blood can, in theory, receive red blood cells from a donor of any ABO type without triggering the same rejection response that would occur in someone with A, B, or O blood. In practice, blood transfusion still involves matching Rh factor and other compatibility checks, so it isn't as simple as AB accepts anything. But among the four ABO types, AB is uniquely flexible on the receiving end, for the exact same underlying reason it's rare in the first place. It carries both markers, so neither one registers as a threat. Health research involving AB blood type is where the story gets more cautious, and it's worth being upfront about that caution rather than glossing over it. Over the past 2 decades, a number of large epidemiological studies have looked for associations between blood type and various health outcomes, and several have flagged AB blood type as showing up more often than expected in certain risk categories. Some studies have reported a modestly higher association between AB blood type and cardiovascular issues, including blood clotting risk, compared to type O. Other research has explored potential links between AB blood type and cognitive decline later in life, with a few studies suggesting a small increased association with memory problems in aging populations. There's also been research examining pancreatic cancer risk across blood types, with some studies noting AB and other non-O types showing up somewhat more frequently among cases compared to type O. None of this amounts to blood type causing disease, and it's important to be precise about that distinction. These are epidemiological associations pulled from population-level data, not controlled experiments proving mechanism. Blood type doesn't get chosen, changed, or treated, so even a confirmed statistical association doesn't translate into actionable medical advice the way a modifiable risk factor would. Researchers themselves are often careful to note that the effect sizes involved are typically small, that findings don't always replicate consistently across different studies and populations, and that blood type sits inside a much larger web of genetic and environmental factors that are far harder to isolate. The honest scientific position right now is that blood type, including AB, appears to correlate with certain health patterns in some studies, but nowhere near strongly enough to be treated as a predictor, let alone a diagnosis. It's an area of ongoing research, not a settled conclusion. Culturally, AB carries a very different kind of reputation, one that has nothing to do with laboratories at all. In Japan, and to a lesser extent in South Korea, blood type is treated the way astrology is treated in much of the West, as a rough personality framework people bring up casually in conversation. This belief system, sometimes called Ketsueki Gata, assigns personality traits to each blood type. Type A is often described as careful and disciplined. Type B is described as independent and unpredictable. Type O is often linked to confidence and sociability. AB, sitting at the intersection of A and B, tends to get described as complex, split, even contradictory, sometimes reserved and analytical, sometimes spontaneous and erratic, depending on who's telling the story. It's popular enough to influence dating profiles, magazine quizzes, and even some hiring conversations in Japan, despite there being no scientific evidence connecting ABO blood type to personality traits. Multiple studies attempting to find a real link between blood type and personality have failed to find consistent results. The belief persists anyway, not because the science supports it, but because it offers a simple framework for talking about human differences. The same appeal astrology has held in other cultures for centuries. The interesting part is that AB, being the rarest and most biologically mixed type, tends to attract the most elaborate personality mythology of all four, treated almost like a wildcard category, precisely because it doesn't fit neatly into the simpler A versus B narrative the belief system leans on. Set the folklore aside, though, and the biological story of AB is genuinely remarkable on its own terms, without needing embellishment. It's a blood type built on genetic compromise rather than dominance, one of the only common traits in human biology where two competing instructions show up fully, simultaneously, instead of one winning out. It's rare not because of any disadvantage, but because of geography and history, because for most of human existence, the populations carrying its two building blocks lived too far apart to combine them in large numbers. Where those populations did meet, along ancient trade routes, through migration, through centuries of contact between East and West, AB frequency rose to reflect it, leaving a rough genetic map of contact and mixing embedded in modern population data. It was discovered almost as an inconvenient exception to a tidy three-type system, and it still occupies an unusual role in medicine today, prized for its plasma, flexible in what it can safely receive, and still being studied for what, if anything, it might reveal about long-term health outcomes. None of that fits the version of AB most people carry around in their heads. The rare type, the hard-to-match type, the one blood banks are always short on. That description isn't wrong, but it's incomplete. Behind the rarity is a genetic record of two lineages that spent long stretches of history developing apart before eventually converging, and every person who carries AB blood today is carrying a small, physical trace of that convergence, whether their ancestors met along a Silk Road trading post, through migration into a new region, or through contact between communities separated for generations. Type O gets called universal because it fits everywhere. AB tells a different kind of story, not about fitting in, but about what happens when two different paths finally cross.